This is CheloniaCast, episode 58. Today I'm joined by Ben Hicks, who is a two-time Emmy Award winning photographer and videographer. Ben focuses a lot on sea turtles and sort of ocean conservation and conservation in general. He's got a really interesting style that kind of captures the sort of majestic beauty of the ocean's creatures and sea turtles in particular. And we've all sort of followed his work for a while, and it's really cool to be able to talk to him about some of his message and such. He's got a studio based out of Southern Florida, and also does some commercial work as well, and we can talk about that. But thank you for joining me today. I'm the only host on today, but we may have some join us later, but it'll still be an awesome conversation. Thanks for coming on, Ben. Excited to have
You're
you.
welcome. I'm happy to talk about turtles always.
Awesome.
It's a
Well,
pleasure.
we'll kick it off with just a kind of a general opener. As what kind of got you into sea turtles and interested in photography?
Um, well, I can kind of go back even further. As a kid, I grew up in South Florida, but in my summers I spent in northern Michigan on a little lake called Green Lake. On the other side of the lake, there was a river called the Betsy River, and me and my cousins would go down that river on a canoe and look for painted turtles to catch. We would catch the turtles, bring them back to our lakefront, and build like a container on the beach. And my grandma would constantly bug us, "You better let those turtles go." And so that was my first fascination, to be honest, with turtles. And fast forward to graduating high school, borrowed my sister's camera and to shoot my friends doing surfing and action sports. Um, that's kind of how I got into cameras. And eventually, I always wanted to take my camera in the water and shoot surfing. And I did that. And my love for nature and the environment was throughout my whole life. And it was just a natural tendency to also shoot what I see below the surface, not just surfing and how I was making money at the time. And so in 2007 and 2008, I was invited a couple times to join my friend, who was a sea turtle biologist that I went to college with. And those images went on my commercial photo blog that I had at the time. And a couple customers were like, "Hey, could we get one of those printed in our uh, what was it? I think it was like an office, doctor's office or something." And from there, I realized, that could be a whole nother avenue for me. And immediately realizing that there was a lot of people that cared not just about baby sea turtle pictures, but also about the environment and how I could capture their attention with my images and video and how I could make a difference.
That's awesome. Yeah, sort of starting out in kind of more general commercial photography and sports, that sort of thing, and transitioning into sort of more of a, I guess, a passion. Not that that other part isn't, but just kind of the natural side of things. I'm curious, what was the transition? I play around with a camera, by no means professional at it or anything. And I've never done any underwater photography, and I'm curious what the transition from terrestrial photography to underwater photography what was like, and what are there some maybe unexpected challenges with that?
I think the biggest transition is to putting your $2,000 to $5,000 camera at the time was a big deal for me, right? And it still is a big deal. Putting in salt water, like putting underwater, that's the biggest deal, right? It's like, is it
Right.
going to leak? Is it going to destroy my camera for to get a couple more photos underwater as compared to above the surface? And I think that's something that's still on my mind, but that's a huge transition, right? Just that part, like it's nerve wracking, it's expensive to get a housing, and so on. So it was a big deal for me to get a housing. I had bought a used housing for another surf photographer at the time, but still, it was a big deal. I was a photographer, so I wasn't making tons of money, obviously, at that time. And from there, it was pretty natural for me. I'm very comfortable in the water. Obviously, come from a surf background. Being comfortable in the water is step one. So therefore, then you can not worry about that part, the physical part. You can then worry about creating and composing the images. It is a, it's like anything. You do have to learn technique. It's much different. When we first started, I really couldn't even see any image that I was shooting. It was, it was a tiny screen inside of a dark housing. It was kind of like shooting film, to be honest. I didn't really ever shoot film underwater. I started shooting film in my career, but by the time I had a housing, at that point, I had a digital camera. So it was challenging much more than it is now with the technology, and dealing with nature was natural for me. Right, I'd already spent tons of time in the water. It was just the process of learning how I could tell the story.
Right, that's really interesting. I do a lot of work with, and some of the hosts that are not on today, but we do a lot of work with in the freshwater springs, specifically in more northern Florida. And there's some folks that come out and do a lot of underwater photography in the springs when we're there to get photos of the turtles. We work on multiple studies there, and it seems like that's hard enough, right? Like you said, it's tough to see what you're actually getting a picture of, but then you're also contending with waves and that sort of thing. I mean, what is it like to actually swim with the camera, and can you see at all what you're doing, or how have you gotten used to that?
You can, yeah. Nowadays, the screens are much bigger on the back of the camera. Um, that actually is part of photography that I do really love. Is you get a bunch of stuff, but you don't really know what you got or if you got anything good until you go back and put it on a computer. And it has that element of surprise still to it, in just like it did back in the film days. So I really love that part of shooting underwater. But changing settings and so on like that, you kind of really have to know your camera, because a lot of times you don't have a lot of time to adjust things because Mother Nature's happening in front of your eyes. So I do have to be very quick with my buttons and understanding which way the currents are moving, the clarity. You know, as a nature photographer in general, you become a weatherman essentially. So just like above the surface, I'm constantly trying to figure out if the conditions are changing or why the currents might be creating, a little bit cloudy water. We had this thing yesterday, and I didn't realize there was sand being pumped into the ocean about a mile away. And sure enough, that was creating clarity issues from where I was shooting. And so those are all things that are elements that it make it challenging, and that's what I really love. Is it's problem solving. Photography is all about problem solving, and it's even more problem solving and a challenge to create the stories below the surface. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's it. Yeah, really interesting. So you sort of specialize, I guess, with a lot of your nature work. It's considered fine art photography, and I was doing a little background research on specifically what that means. It seems like there isn't really this defined sort of narrow definition for that. But I'm curious to you, sort of, what is art, and what is fine art photography versus other types of photography?
Well, art essentially is just people buy artwork to put on their walls and look at, right? So that's a very loose definition. I originally started labeling my business as fine art because I needed to put something there to let people know that it was for sale, right? Obviously, to try to make a living, I had to be good at marketing. A lot of photographers, that's their biggest challenge, is trying to sell their work. Creating the work, there's amazing photographers out there, but you have to also be an entrepreneur and a business person. Um, that's a huge part of what I do. And so the fine art gives it a little bit better understanding for people that this is a serious thing that we do. All of our larger pieces are all signed in limited edition of 50 at a time, things like that. So it becomes more of more of a fine art. The the definition of art, I'm going to stray away from that because there's many different definitions of what art is. You know, people creating photos with AI or Photoshop, or in the end, it's artwork, and people enjoy looking at it. And I think these days there's lots of controversy around showing pictures of nature and what has been done to the image and so on. And to be honest, a lot of people don't realize that it's creativity. It's that's how things evolve and technology. And so artwork is going to be, the definition of art is going to change constantly with the way our society comes up with new technologies and so on. So I really stick with more of a National Geographic approach that, a lot of my images are very much natural, very small adjustments that are made, sometimes really just based on the color space, because you lose, the red spectrum, cyan underwater. Other than that, most of my images, sometimes the spackling is cleaned up, the speckles in the water. But other than that, I try to keep it pretty pure, and not have it like super focus on the actual subject. That's the goal. And that's the attention getter, not whatever I've done to the image.
Right, right. With a lot of the skill you've developed with your photographs, I when I picked up photography a while back, I thought, the logical way of doing this. I come from sort of a research background in science, and a lot of times in that you have to build up the knowledge base through reading and that kind of thing, and then you can apply it. With learning a lot of the things that you know now with photography, was that something you did through books and that sort of thing, or is it an experienced based thing? And how did you get to where you're at now with skill wise?
So my path was, I went to FAU college, Florida Atlantic University, and I went for art. Have a degree in graphic design and a minor in photography. And I, of course, was taught traditional techniques with the film camera. But as I tell everybody, almost everything's learned on my own, right? I also, when I started out, immediately started asking others to assist them so I could learn from others that have been in the industry for a long time. And that was mainly on the commercial side or action sports side. There wasn't anybody in my area that I knew was a professional nature underwater photographer. It's not something that I didn't think I was going to be doing that as a living. I didn't set out saying this is what I want to do, because I was more practical thinking like, hey, I need to make a real living. It was more of a less like a passion thing, like you mentioned, like, hey, I really like going out in nature. I like documenting it. And from there, I loved doing it. So I pushed myself and of learning every part of it, right? From the stages of shooting stills to then being asked, we need video, high def 4K video of everything you're shooting with stills. So then I had to force myself to learn that technique. And I think nowadays I tell most photographers, you just got to go out there and push the button a lot. Lots of failures equals success.
Yeah, that's at least it. Yeah, I've noticed that. And yeah, just with the basic stuff that I've done with effectively just documenting the research I do with these pond turtles in California and just getting, pictures of that sort of thing. It's very much like I can read all I want about it, but going out and doing it, you realize, oh, this setting kind of works here, and they just very basic things. But it's interesting that even at the high level you're working at, that's sort of still how you progress. And not to mention, I mean, it's good, like you said, to have a background in it and learn a lot of different techniques. And there's sort of all, a lot of fields are sort of like that. You bring in knowledge from experience and also from background. So maybe we can talk a bit more about the sea turtle aspect of things, and um, what is it about sea turtles in particular that captivates you?
So I think it was a natural progression for me to um, work with sea turtles. That was kind of the first thing I was invited to document with my housing and the nature side of things. And their story is fascinating. It really is, right? So how they come up on the same beach, over 25 years after they're born, lay their eggs, never see their young ever again, just like all turtles. And but saltwater base was in the ocean. That's something that I love, and I lived in an area here which is a huge turtle nesting area, South Florida. So it was easy for me to go out with researchers and biologists. The resources were right here, and at the time, not a lot of people were focused on trying to photograph juveniles or babies in the water, and so that was a challenge to me. And in 2012, National Geographic published my first image, and that made me open my eyes that I was doing something different. That I definitely needed to follow this passion, and it was confidence booster, saying like, "Hey, this is a real thing that I can be heavily involved with, and I love doing it. I really still do love going out in the ocean, swimming with my camera. Yesterday, I didn't. I were out there for an hour and a half with my new assistant, and we saw some turtles, but I didn't take one picture of a turtle. But I still love being out in the ocean and swimming and seeing. We picked up a big, pile of trash. I don't know what it was, but it was ghost netting, I think, and that part I love, and I've been doing it since then. For a long time, and every day I still like going out there. So. Sea turtles, they need a voice, and I think it's my duty to help them and educate others. They're a good example of how important our human impact has been on them in the last 100 years, in the last 50 years, and even the last 10 to 15 years. It just keeps growing based on studies on how much humans have impacted them. And they're one of the species, like a lot of species in the world, that have taken it pretty hard right away. And there's going to be, with humans impacting our climate and our environment, there's going to be more animals, obviously, eventually being affected. But sea turtles are pretty, pretty sensitive to a lot of things. I mean, they eat things very similar to plastic looking when they're young, and they're affected in so many different ways: the climate, the beaches, how we treat our beaches, and our construction close by their nesting areas, the lighting situation. There's so many ways that we can just change little things of how we do in society to help with sea turtles and sharks and so on. But who doesn't like a baby sea turtle? I can capture people's attention really quickly, and I think that's what's really drawn me into this field.
Yeah, right. They're super charismatic. It's coming from, I mean, we do a lot of freshwater turtle and tortoise conversations on the podcast and involved with that sort of work. And it's compared to sea turtles, it's tough. It's tough to market the other ones.
It is.
They've got a lot going for them. It's interesting. What is it? Is there? I'm just thinking about this from an artist's perspective. We've spoken to a lot of researchers on here, but from an artist's perspective, what is it about the sea turtle form or function that is so appealing to people in general? What is that?
That's a good question. Um, because, like you said, turtles, terrestrial turtles, land turtles, whatever you want to call them. We have gopher tortoises here, obviously, everywhere as well, and they are, threatened by human impact. But a picture of a baby gopher tortoise doesn't do anything compared to a picture of the same size baby sea turtle.
Right.
Um, people love the beach and the ocean, and I think a lot of people fantasize a lot about the beach and the ocean, especially when they don't live nearby it, and that's a huge attraction. And I think TV also has a lot to do with it. Recently, in the last 20 years, of how there's all kinds of The Little Mermaid, and they painted a really positive picture to sea turtles, and the fact, people love the beach and they lay their eggs on the beach, and people visit those beaches, and it's kind of a little bit of like it's an unknown. It's kind of untouchable too, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I'd love to see a baby sea turtle," and it's really kind of hard to see one ever, right? Unless you're dedicated and go out in the middle of the night, or and so on. So it has that attraction that's kind of unattainable a little bit, and people are attracted to that, really, right? So they're like, we know they're there. They're down under the sand. Um, it's funny because it's the same thing for other turtles, but sea turtles get all the attention, especially for you guys, right? It's like they get 98% of the attention for turtles in the world, probably. I assume, maybe Galapagos or something gets a bunch of attention, but sea turtles get all the love, right? You guys don't get a lot of love for pond turtles. I have pictures of pond turtles uh, down there in my collection, and I tell you, the small one, they sit there, nobody ever gets them, and they're really pretty, painted turtles, red ears, yellows, everything, and they're I have juveniles, like tiny babies that are really pretty. Nobody ever buys them.
Yeah, right. The PR aspect, I guess, for the freshwater turtles, but it's interesting. Yeah, it does say something about like I've thought about the symmetry of sea turtles, but the symmetry is also there for other turtles for the most part. It's just like it's something about what they are and where they are that's so appealing. I mean, it is like when we went out and someone that came with us on our most recent trip to see, well, just sort of on the beach and seeing turtles. The first loggerhead we saw come out, I mean, it almost brought her to tears. It just like that whole process of coming out. The female is that's literally the only time she's going to be out of the water, maybe six other times in 2 month period, and
Yeah.
is hauling out and working really hard to get the next generation going. And that's been going for, I mean, millions of years. It is an impactful thing, and just something. The sea turtles captured that more than other turtles. I mean, sea turtles are really interesting to me just the same. I think that there's more of a divide that needs to be there, kind of between the fields, but a lot of that probably is brought on by the publicity aspect. But it's a good thing. It's good attention regardless. Um, so maybe we could sort of talk a bit about the story behind some of your photographs, and for anyone that's interested, your website, we'll link that in the description, and you can see a lot of what we're talking about there, and even purchase those things. But one thing that struck me that was something that you posted is these aerial photos of green turtles congregating in, I believe it was Borneo. I could be wrong, but just looked, I mean, this looks fascinating and picturesque. I'm curious, how did that sort of come to be, and what was that experience like?
That's got a good story. So in 2018, 2 months after my youngest was born, I was invited to go to on an influencer trip for the Ministry of Tourism of Indonesia. And there was one person from each continent around the world on this trip. And it was a bit controversial with my family because I had just had my daughter born, and our other son was 2 years old at the time. So it wasn't the best time for me to
Yeah,
be
right.
leaving the house for a month,
Dang.
because it was 25 days. And but I looked at the itinerary and I just was like, it's a once in a lifetime trip. Um, I was paid to do it. And so we went to all of the underwater destinations around Indonesia, the best ones. right? Each one, and it was a red carpet trip too. They did everything right, and
Wow.
on the way there, I got like a stomach virus on Japan Airlines. So when I landed in Jakarta, Sumatra, I wasn't feeling the greatest. And our first leg of the trip was to the Borneo area, and the first day was that place where those turtles were taken. And the first dive, I was like, I can't go. My stomach, I'm ready to throw up. So I had my drone, and I started flying my drone around because I was like, I got to do something, because we had to create content every single day, publish it. It had to go through the producer, all this stuff. So I still had to work. And lo and behold, I was like, what's down there in that grassy area? And it was literally not very far off our resort where we were staying. We were staying on a fairly small island out in Borneo too. And yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. So that place was known for turtles. There's a dive spot called Turtle Alley. And actually, we were there for like 5 days, and I ended up diving at the spot. And I'm not a scuba diver. And actually, that was my first scuba dive, was at Turtle Alley with an instructor.
Wow.
I had not, I had always been a free diver. I shoot shallow water. I can't equalize one of my ears because I've had issues with my ears since I was a kid. I had like 10 surgeries. But in order to go on this trip, I had to have scuba certification. That was prerequisite. And I told them, I'm not really going to scuba dive that much because it's too hard for me to go down. And anyway, I had the certification ready to go. And my last week before I went, I got an ear infection. We were shooting a ton of stuff for another project. Got an ear infection, so I couldn't do the pool end of the certification with Patty certification. So when I got to Indonesia, I also got another some sickness from being on the plane. Couldn't finish it. So then I couldn't even so literally we were on a real dive, and I had to do my whole certification, take the vest off, take your mask off. And she said, okay, you're good to go. And then I had to join the rest of them and do a real dive on Turtle Alley. And so the next day, after I'd shot that drone photo, which is the day to go to Turtle Alley, and after the dive, I said, guys, I know where all these turtles go when they're not down at the reef. I'm like, I shot it yesterday on my drone. And so the third day we had downtime. And so I said, I want to go swim with those turtles that I see on the flats, because that's more my area. It's not deep. It was super shallow. And not one of those turtles would let me get even close to them. I couldn't even get within 25 yards of them. They would take off. And so the only way that photo could be, the only way that place could be photographed was with a drone. And it was literally like probably 30 yards from the hotel, the edge of the hotel, out on this grass flats. And a lot of the turtles that were going in the Turtle Alley, that's where they would go to feed, because the greens would be eating the seagrass roots. But yeah, that's the story behind that image. And I have a big canvas of it in my studio, just to really, for a lot of times for young people when they educate. I do a lot of like homeschool science classes come here, and I do a slideshow or projection and tell them about what I do and so on. And that image is always a good chat, because it really kind of encompasses what what sea turtles are all about, not just out in the deep ocean. A lot of green sea turtles specifically, they live their juvenile life in very shallow water, and are then susceptible to boats and humans and you name it. Seagrass issues where things are not flourishing anymore, and so on. So yeah, it was a cool place to take that photo. But I probably would not have gotten that photo if I wasn't feeling, if I was feeling normal, at least on that trip.
Well, it sounds like it sort of worked out in a roundabout way. You probably would have gotten in anyway, but the drone would have been the way to go regardless. So kind of kept you there. I think that it is sort of like you've got to get sick on international travel at some point to get your sort of yeah, that's just a checkbox you've got to do.
Get out of the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had some experiences and ended up in a South African hospital for a week, and that, yeah, it's just par for the course.
It
Well, that,
is.
yeah, it's really interesting. And so you've got a cool perspective because you go out and do these things and you see a lot of behaviors and interesting behaviors. And you touched upon that a little bit. You've got the turtles and move into these shallow areas. But were there any other interesting behaviors that kind of caught you off guard with the sea turtles that were on this in this area of Indonesia?
I wasn't able to observe them that much behavior wise. We were with an entourage of people. So my time was fairly limited. Out here, I sometimes spend 2 to 3 hours with one individual. And so I can really kind of understand what's going on a little bit with them and their character and their whole attitude about that day, or are they going to let me be near them? On that trip, I didn't have a lot of experience. The main thing was coming out of that. Their reaction of taking off away from seeing me is usually means they probably didn't have much human interaction in that area, which is a great thing, right? I It's still kind of like um, surprises us why certain areas where greens are in shallow water act the way they do, or don't act the way we think they're gonna, act. Sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're not. Meaning not they're not trying to bite you; they just take off when they get close to you. It's just a case by case basis. Because I've been places in Indonesia before, not on that trip, where a turtle has been, friendly to me, and I know they've never been exposed to people before. And so it's interesting. And you'll have turtles around here that are exposed for people all the time, and all the time want nothing to do with people. So that's why it's interesting. Sea turtles are truly pretty interesting because they're kind of like manatees a lot of ways. In some ways, each one is completely unique, and their reaction to humans or other fish, even too. When other fish try to go up and clean their shell, some of them get totally pissed and try to get the fish off. Others just sit there and be like, "Yeah, cool, get it off my shell." Otherwise, I'd be under a rock trying to get it.
Hmm.
So they're unique animals for sure. Yeah, interesting to see that.
Yeah, sort of different personalities. You've got a few images. There's at least one that stands out with it looks like two young green turtles that are, there's some emotion almost in their face, but they're sort of cuddled on top of each other. And I'm curious if you've seen that. Do you think that's social, or how social are that?
So that was shot last year. In my 15 years of doing this, that's the first time I've ever seen two juvenile greens interacting. And that was a whole process. Like, I have video of them swimming around each other. Um, I don't really know what's going on. Obviously, they're far from sexual maturity. It wasn't in breeding season anyway. Um, there was not really any food involved. Um, they were hanging out. One and this sometimes does happen. There'll be a turtle that will kind of like, uh, they're individual species, right? They don't really have soulmates or anything like that, and they'll be feeding, and then one will get closer and closer and closer, keep feeding, and then all of a sudden one will realize, oh, there's another turtle right here. And sometimes there'll be like a dog and like, smell this guy. And this guy would be like, get away from me. Or this guy will say, okay, cool. Now we split up. That doesn't happen very often because I don't see a lot of turtles that close, two of them at a time. But every once in a while it does. But this case where they're kind of like interacting with each other, That's the first time I've ever seen it in my career. I don't know what they were doing. I did show it to some biologists just to let them know if there are anybody studying that behavior. Um, but it was really unique to see that. Yeah, they were at first they were actually swimming with each other, and not going the same direction. They were literally swimming with the same. It's not just by chance swimming in the same direction, which sometimes happens. Because I'm in feeding area. I'm in areas vegetation where there's in one view sometimes 10 turtles, 10 green sea turtles in South Florida where we live. So it is a chance to sometimes see them get close, but they don't ever really interact with each other. It's usually almost like a dog. We're real quick. Smell, okay, go off on our own way. We're eating. And that's and this is something that you know. I think it depends on the time of day too, right? I think early in the morning, I've always seen them a bit more curious of other animals rather than the middle of the day or in the evening. They're done sleeping during the night. So it's something that probably only really happens in the morning time. But, I'm a photographer, I'm not a biologist. A lot of people think I'd be a sea turtle expert biologist. I've obviously learned so much from being around it for so many years, but there's still a lot for me to learn and know behavior. But that behavior was really interesting, and I'm fortunate that I could capture it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you've got a lot of this experience just from going out and making observations that other people may not, be able to do that, and you're capturing this all on sort of on film, and it's really interesting. I'm curious because this sort of brings up the question of, I think a lot of photographer, in a commercial sense, you're probably really trying to control a scene, and you go in with this defined vision. But when you're doing this kind of thing, I mean, with that example of going out and seeing these two turtles socializing or doing whatever they were doing, you didn't know that that was going to be the case prior to seeing that. So how much of an image do you have in your head when you go out and do this kind of thing versus how much of it is just kind of spur of the moment?
Most of what I do is just going out in an area where I know there's sea life, where I've heard there's sea life. I heard a tip or something like that, and yeah, it's on the fly. I do get assignments for TV and such to try to get certain shots or something like that. But 99% of the time, I'm going on my own without much direction. Oh, excuse me. I will say that sometimes I go out with some of a premeditated plan based on the lens that I choose. So certain lenses will lend themselves to saying, "Oh, I'd like to try to get a turtle feeding this way or that way, or a really wide shot, near the surface of a turtle rising up or something like that." But for the most part, I'm going out and getting what I can. In the nesting season, when I'm going along with biologists, which is I'll start walking pretty seriously in June with biologists. It's the same thing. Literally, I get whatever I can get with them because the chances of seeing hatchlings early in the morning with daylight is always rare, and so I just have to be ready to go. The main thing is is preparation of my gear and myself and being in good shape, being able to swim long distances against currents, things like that. That's what I need to be prepared for, before I'm going out. But other than that, I don't know what I'm going to see, and I might not see anything. That's part of it.
Right. Yeah, that brings to mind the physical aspect of doing this. It's like it's one thing to see the image, but I'm sure you go through thousands before you actually have one that sort of sticks, and that's got to be kind of frustrating. But then the physical aspect of this sort of thing, what is it when you're going and getting one of these hatchling shots or a female sea turtle nesting or something like that? I mean, what is going into that? What kind of work on the that people aren't seeing?
Uh, So it's sacrificing my mornings to take my kids to school. Um, the night before, I'll usually make the decision where I'm going and when. Uh, and so I pack two different backpacks. One backpack will have an underwater housing with my camera inside of it, fins, mask, snorkel, and then that's it. And then my another backpack on my back, which is usually the heaviest one, will have two cameras and two lenses, a wide angle lens and a long lens, and then and an extra battery for all three cameras. Um, and so I'm hiking with those two backpacks on, and I leave my house usually around 5 o'clock in the morning in the summer, and I drive anywhere from like 20 minutes to an hour, depending where I'm joining a biologist or a beach. All of my hatchling stuff is shot under a permit with FWC. So I try to be by the book as much as possible. And that way, if I ever get anything that I could, be offered to sell to National Geographic or anything, it's on a documented beach. I'm with a biologist. They know exactly that things were shot correctly and so on. So I have to make sure I'm going to the beach that they are, assigning me to, saying, hey, yep, this season you can go with these guys or those guys, and so on. And that's a thing with FWC. They trust certain organizations. I'm usually with a paid biologist or scientist, not with a volunteer organization. And then I'm almost always hiking on the beach, and usually they are on four-wheelers. So physically, it is pretty demanding. So I'll get to the beach around 6 o'clock, and I try to start hiking before the biologists, before sunrise. I hike in the dark because I'll sometimes see something happening. Um, I'll check all the nests and make sure there's not any emergencies coming out, and then I'll follow the biologist. And so, when they have an excavation of a nest that's, a few days old, or there's a nesting female or something like that, I'll go to work and I'll document what they're doing. And sometimes they'll determine if they release a hatchling or they see an emergence, and sometimes the hatchlings get put in a bucket, taken back to a center, and then released at night. And it really all depends on the organization, and then they'll decide ultimately if they feel the hatchlings that are being rescued are healthy enough to be released at that moment, or maybe at a later time. And so, yeah, I'll be hiking, up to 3 miles in the sand, and it's fine up until about 8 o'clock, maybe 7:45, and then the sun is just, it's blaring, and I only go when it's flat, and that means there's no breeze, and so it's like a sauna. I have a shade hat. I usually have a full neck, trying to keep myself out of the sun as much as possible, and hope I get something. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's one thing. I mean, when I've been out in the past, a lot of times we'll do it at night and you cover a lot of ground. But I feel like walking on the beach in the day, you get a lot more perspective for distance, whereas at night it just sort of flows into itself. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something that you sort of relate to, but it seems like, yeah, the day is tough. Well, I'm curious with the making of, you sort of got this the National Geographic photograph of the young sort of loggerhead, and really a fascinating situation. Curious what sort of led to that shot. I always wonder, how do you find these hatchlings? Is this all? I mean, what kind of, how did you get in the position to take that shot and some of these other hatchling shots?
So I go only on the beaches that have the highest density of nesting, right?
Mm,
So that's something that I have access to. Been doing it a long time, and I know exactly where there is. There's times in I'd say early July that there's 200 crawls in less than a mile, right? Each
Yeah.
morning. That's a lot of turtles, right? And if you have that day after day after day, you get into August and you're having hatchlings come out constantly, and those thick, intense days. There's lots of action. I'm walking in the dark, so I'm walking in the dark, and I'll see if there's any nests where the chamber has dropped. Do you know this technique? So, in a sea turtle nest, it's marked, and approximately where the nest is, there's obviously a hole below it where the turtles are, and to the common eye, it just looks like sand on top of it. As soon as the turtles start hatching, the top of the sand drips down. So that means, oh, they're going to be coming out soon. And I will sometimes just sit there. I'll sit there until the biologist calls me and says, hey, we have something else going on down the beach. Or if I saw something else. Or I see one hatchling head sticking out. And I'll sit there and I'll wait for 2 hours until I see another come out. That's the only way to do it. You have to just, I ultimately the best thing would be to bring along 5 assistants with me and have everybody sit on those nests. That's actually how they monitor nests in Fort Lauderdale Beach. STOP, which is an organization that protects the turtles from going out in the road because there's so many lights in Fort Lauderdale. They have volunteers that'll sit on nests at night, and they sit there and watch and wait until the turtles start coming out. And they have this whole technique where they draw these rings around the nests in the sand, and they can and they'll monitor. Each volunteer will monitor like a set of nests, right? And they'll walk from one to the next. And if a hatchling comes out, they can determine when that hatchling came out by how far out the turtle was from those rings as the last time they went by it. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And so I don't do that intensive a technique, but I literally, I just constantly am watching the tops of the nests. And a lot of times during the thick of it, we see them. I just see the hatchlings coming out. They're stragglers. A lot of times I'm helping them. They're stuck in another hole because when you have 200 turtles coming ashore in the mornings, they're all digging up more and more holes, and there's stuff everywhere. They're digging up other eggs. There's crows coming down, eating those eggs. There's all kinds of things going on, and so we're out there documenting it. Also trying to help save any that I see. We'll see birds flying away with hatchlings. It's wild. In the thick of the season, there's all kinds of stuff happening. It's almost, it's not quite like it, but there's a place in Trinidad that it's a leatherback nesting beach, and that place is they get 400 crawls a night in May of leatherbacks, and it's less than 1 kilometer long, the beach, and that is like Jurassic Park. There's eggs everywhere. There's dogs, wild dogs trying to eat things. There's birds. In the morning, there's still leatherbacks sitting on the beach trying to nest. There's leatherbacks nesting in the shore break. It's crazy. And so it's a step down from that, but sometimes we see some crazy stuff, I've seen twice now where, because of construction and human impact, the dunes get these huge ledges, and the green sea turtles go all the way up to the dune.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they'll dig into the berm, and the berm collapses onto them. And so we've had to rescue them. we had a really dramatic one about 4 years ago where because we can see the tracks of the mother go up to the, to nest, but we don't see a return track. And it's hard to see these because there's so many, tracks every morning, and it's morning after morning. And if it doesn't rain, they don't go away. There's no beach raker or anything in those areas. And we had to dig a turtle out that was 4 feet down, and she was still
Wow.
alive. Yeah, most of the time they die, they don't survive those caves, excavations. But yeah, I've seen some crazy stuff. A lot of times, um, there's predation immediately when the hatchlings get to the water. Um, there's all kinds of stuff just waiting for them. Big fish, um, crabs, birds, you name it. Big tarpon. Yeah. So that's been one of my things to focus on, is trying to capture that.
Yeah, right. This is the gauntlet of survival that you hear about with hatchling turtles, the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 4,000. And like you said, you've got some incredible shots of, I think there was a YouTube one of sea turtle wrestling a crab kind of coming out of the nest and just capturing that turmoil too. That there's the numbers side of things where you can say it's 1 in 1,000 that make it to adulthood or whatever, but then there's also the in the moment individual side of it, which you sum up all of those things. It's just incredible to think about all the commotion and that leads to that, the trajectory of the species, and you capture that. So with the leatherbacks, you mentioned that. Maybe we can briefly touch on that. Um, I mean that's incredible. And what is it like? Are there any special considerations you have to have with leatherbacks when you're taking photos of them or videoing them?
Yeah, there is. Real quick too, the turtle and the crab story. So that's on National Geographic right now.
Wow.
On Disney Plus, they have a national park series, a National Geographic, and the one about Biscayne Bay is 2.5 minutes long about the story of the turtle and the crab. So you can see that. It's really interesting. Yeah. So leatherbacks, all sea turtles have lots of, they have completely different behaviors, each one, to be honest. Greens being one of the most sensitive, and leatherbacks are probably one of the least sensitive. Um, they all don't like humans being near them when they're nesting, just like people. When a mother is giving birth, she doesn't want to have a crowd around her, right? When she's about to give birth, stay away from a mother. you know, Watch out. She's about to have a kid. So I think I tell people that I'm saying, think about it, think about, if you were having a kid, would you want to have a bunch of people crowding around you? No, you want to be in peace. And so, with little kids, I always try to have to relate and go down to their level. And so same thing with adults, right? So we have to, be very, very careful approaching leatherbacks and so on. I'm probably, you know, I'm much more sensitive and let them be. A lot of biologists know them better and will be able to read them and say, oh, okay, they're at this point of nesting, they're not going back. And they'll make that call. And that's when I say, okay, I'll go photograph them. Leatherbacks, usually when they start laying their eggs, they don't stop for anything. Um, Unfortunately, that's how they get eaten in Central America by, um, it's not panther, but
The
I guess
jaguars, maybe?
jaguars.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, by the jaguars, because they'll continue to nest, and the jaguar will eat the thing's head off. Something crazy. Yeah. So usually, it's once they're nesting. But I don't have a huge urge to, you know, essentially get super close to a turtle. I have gotten super close to leatherbacks. Most of that was on assignment. Another thing is, in the United States, as compared to other countries, it's a completely different ballgame, right? So, United States has lots of rules in place, which is really important. Other countries, they don't have any rules. I mean, they'll say they will, but I've been in places where like, oh, no flashlights, you can't get within this many feet, and then we go out there, and the guide is like, he's got his flashlight. I'm like, what happened to your red headlight? Well, I just couldn't see it. I'm like, okay, so I guess we threw that out the door.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I have to just kind of look the other way, do my job. I try to educate from my experience and what I've learned, but what I've really taken from it is um, turtles. Like any species or any animal around the world, they need their space, and so as a photographer, my job is to try to get as close as possible to nature, but at the same time, I don't want to, because I want to be there but not be there, right? And I want to blend in as much as possible, and so that's my job. It's a fine line to try to blend in, but also try to get an image or a video.
Right. Yeah, I imagine that's right. You want to capture the animal without interference, and that's got to be yeah, you're dealing with pretty heavy and cumbersome equipment a lot of the time, and that's kind of a situation. But yeah, I mean, what you say is it definitely. I've spent a little time in Costa Rica and elsewhere, and yeah, you go out and it's a lot more. For people that are responsible about it, it's a good thing because you get this really holistic experience. But you can definitely kind of abuse that privilege of having kind of open access. So I'm curious what the hardest, maybe the most frustrating project and the most rewarding project you've worked on. Sometimes those are the same thing, but what has that been for you with regard to
um,
Sea Turtles?
the hardest project. So 2 years ago this summer, Jeff Corwin is
Yeah,
the nature guy.
we've worked. I've actually had the opportunity to work with that group on a project they did recently in the Santa Fe River with some different turtles. So yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
So I've DP'd on a bunch of his episodes for the underwater work, and they were down here shooting an episode for America's Wild or something. I'm not sure. It was on Animal Planet, and we were doing sea turtles, catch and release, tagging sea turtles. And I don't use tanks, and that was a big thing. They said,
Mm.
"Well, wait, you're the underwater video guy, but you're not going to be on scuba." And I said, "Nope." Uh, and so I had to prove myself, right? And there was lots of questions. I mean, his videographer has been with him for 27 years,
Wow.
right? Yes, and he's a great guy. And now I know him personally and worked with him a handful of times. But at the time, that was my first project with them. And maybe it was 3 years ago now. Yeah, it's 3 years ago because it was just after COVID. It was still kind of intense with COVID. And we were going to work with In-Water Research, and they're an organization that does lots of research and tagging of sea turtles all around Florida. And I've worked with them previously many, many times. And they catch and tag sea turtles at night. And so my job was to capture the process in the dark, in the ocean at night. And we only had 2 different days scheduled for this. And of course, both days, the wind was blowing onshore, wind chop, and it was bumpy, but we had to get it done. And we had 3 boats, and I had my assistant with me. And the, the, the part of the project I had to capture was the biologist diving down with Jeff, everyone on tanks except for me, including the safety divers. They would dive down to about maybe 10 feet where the rocks were, looking for sleeping green juvenile sea turtles. Maybe they were about this big, not big turtles. And we couldn't have any lights because if you had lights on the turtles, they would see you and take off. They would wake up. And so we had to use like a signal system. So I would swim above the divers, they would be down below, and I couldn't film anything until they pretty much almost had the turtle in their hand. And so we all had like these little tiny, they're like safety lights on our backs, right? So we can be seen. So that kind of gave me an idea where they were. But I kind of had to like look to see, they had small hand lights, but they were very small. And I couldn't turn my lights on and start filming until they almost had the turtle. And so I had to time it. So I like, okay, he's about to catch the turtle. Dive down, start pressing record, and then turn my huge lights on, light the whole freaking ocean up pretty much. They're brighter than a car, essentially.
Wow.
And start filming. And I would have to film until they had that turtle all the way to the surface. So that was only on one breath. And that was by far my most challenging project that I've done so far. Just, I think mentally, it really wasn't that hard, but it was for a major network, right? And in the end, I just wanted to do my best, and I wanted them to have the best footage possible. And so it worked out great, but I can tell you, I slept really well that night.
Yeah, right.
it was a lot of up and down, and we probably filmed from about 9:30 till 2 a.m.
Wow. Yeah, all night.
It was intense because they bring the turtles up, put them on the boat. We probably get like, I think 3 or 4, and then we go back into the intercoastal to calm waters, and then they film the whole thing of them tagging them, taking care of his piece, all the things to tag a turtle, which each one takes a while. So I had some recovery time, but I had to keep doing that process. But that was probably my most challenging piece, mainly just because it was, I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to do the best possible for a national television show. If it was something on my own, I definitely had challenging things to shoot on my own, but the pressure was just myself. I wasn't working for a producer or a director at the time. I've been caught in crazy currents and definitely more or less physical, dangers in my life than just that was more like a production, pressure in a way. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm curious, is there a situation we can start to kind of wind things down with a few more questions? And I'm curious, like thinking in the future, is there any event or sea turtle related thing that you're really hoping to have the chance to go and visit or photograph?
I still never really photographed turtles in Hawaii, which is it's wild, right? I've shot turtles in Fiji and all over Indonesia and all over Central America, North America. I'd like to do that. It'd be cool to shoot the flatback turtles in Australia. I think that would be pretty neat. I've tried to get Oceanic Society to bring me there to photograph them, and they want to send me, but it's expensive, obviously. There's so many places to go, right, in this world. And I like spending time in the Bahamas. The water is amazing there, and I'll always go back. There's so many turtles out there. There is a lot of pelagic stuff in the Indian Ocean for leatherbacks, and I think that would be really neat to do. I'd like and to go outside the realm of turtles. I haven't spent much time with whales in the water at all, other than whale sharks. So that's something I've always would want to do is swim with a blue whale, or a killer whale.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I mean, the largest vertebrate. That must be an incredible swimming next to something that's a school bus multiplied by 20 or whatever. It's just be mind-boggling. I mean, yeah, that would be incredible. I'm curious I don't know how this would work out photographically, but the Aribatas, the mass nesting events. I don't. Is that something that you'd have interest in doing? I could see that being kind of a tough thing to, and maybe not come out so well on a photo. But
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I totally forgot about that. I would like to be put on an assignment to do that. So I've been places where there's Aribatas. I'm actually going to be in Costa Rica again near Osinel, which is
yeah,
an Aribata space, which I was there 2 years ago as well. Um, but there weren't any Aribatas when I was there. Just missed it, the timing. Um, it would be amazing to see. As far as photographing it, I think my brain would be overloaded. There's so many different ways to do it. That yeah, I think that would be great. I haven't had anybody send me on assignment to do one, um, but I probably should just go on my own. Um, yeah, that would be cool. It's just hard to time, right? It's every 2 weeks, and sometimes it's a few days. It's kind of hard to time. It's also some of those areas or locations. Um, you have to really work with the locals, and um, I personally would like to shoot the side of it that where the locals take 10% of the eggs and tell that story, because I think a lot of people don't understand why people still eat turtle eggs and the process and how it works and so on. And I don't think there's not a lot of documentaries done, like a full deep documentary on that, like how they go collect 10% or more of the eggs on the first day or two of the nesting, and what they do with those eggs and where they go, and how many eggs still get laid after that in that area, and so on. And I think hearing from, even like interviewing locals about, their ancestors and how they survived off sea turtle eggs and so on, I'd like to tell that story. I think that would be really interesting, um, because that's part of our history. That's part of, sea turtles in general. Their population, uh, I don't think was ever, in danger by that happening. The reason they take the eggs is because most of those eggs get dug up anyway, right? Because the next day the turtles keep digging the eggs up. There's so many.
yeah, right. I mean, that would be fascinating. That's a really good point you make too, with the fact that you don't see that. I mean, for how fascinating an event it is, it's not covered detail as you'd expect. And yeah, and just going through the whole history of at Occidental, the audio and the group there, the guide group, and sort of the egg harvest and how that may be a sustainable practice, but there's a lot of debate. I mean, you could go so many directions with that. I spent some time. I spent 3 months in Costa Rica last year, and spent some time at Occidental as well. It also is nice to hear that I'm not the only one that spent a week there and didn't see anything. And it happened to be like 3 weeks later than anticipated the time I was there. So it's just even the unpredictability of it, just chronicling what it's like to wait would be fascinating. I mean, that's really interesting. A lot there that would be cool. Yeah. So I thinking about that kind of thing, and that's a lot of future stuff that's interesting. You've had, it seems like, kind of an interesting rise to starting your own business and that sort of thing. Maybe in a nutshell, you could just go over kind of how you began your own studio, because that's kind of a seemingly a tough thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people look at me and said, "Oh, wow, I'd always want to have a studio one day." And to be honest, I always thought I don't want to have a studio one day, because then I'm going to be stuck to that, and I got to pay for the rent, and coming from the practical side, right? And so I was kind of forced to have a studio. To be honest, it was the opposite. A lot of photographers like dream of having a gallery, and I understand that, it's a great dream to have, but for the most part, it's very hard to make any money. There's a small percentage that do, and not to dash their dreams, but that's the reality, right? We were working out of my garage. I had an assistant, and things got busy when I bought my first printer, my big first printer, because I was like, I need to start printing my own images. I was starting to sell to nature centers small prints, and I was, selling maybe 50 a month, something like that, 35 a month. And then also doing art shows, which garnered even more prints than that at that time. And so we had in my garage, and the garage, 2-car garage, suddenly turned in the whole garage was tables, laying out prints, drying them. My assistant was working in the garage like 2 days a week, just cutting prints, right? And I didn't have kids yet, and so my wife was okay with that. And I had to get a studio down the road, and I looked and looked and looked for years because I'm in an area where real estate is incredibly expensive. Crow flies. I'm a mile from the beach right here, and so I had to be real careful on making something that was sustainable, long term. And so I finally found a space that is owned by a former fireman and not by a big corporate investment firm or anything like that. And we kind of made it our own. It's about 2,000 square feet. Right now, I'm upstairs in the mezzanine where my office is, and down below is our gallery right behind you. You see, it's about 22 feet ceiling, 2-foot ceilings. So below that is a gallery space where I have probably about 500 prints that people can come in and look through. And we also ship out constantly to retailers. In the back, we have a shooting space, shoot commercial work, and that's also where we print everything. We make canvases. We make our own canvas stretcher bars. Below this is a shooting space that we created that I rent out to another photographer, and she shoots babies and boudoir and pregnancy stuff. And so that helps offset it, of me having a studio in East Boca Raton, South Florida. Um, and it's been an interesting process. We had this for almost 6 years, this space, and I've been fortunate enough to always have somebody help pay for the rent. I've just collabed with other photographers. We also rent the space to other photographers to shoot with, and so I've always tried to figure out how I can help offset some of the expenses. um, it's it's been very beneficial in the fact that I think I have a certain customer base that likes to come in and physically see some of the pieces before they order a big piece. And so, like a big canvas or a big metal or a bunch of canvases or metal. And so, I think without having a space, I would lose that percentage of my audience. They wouldn't want to come to my house, obviously. So, I've looked at it that way. I'm constantly always trying to be ready for the next move in case it happens. But yeah, right now we're pretty comfortable here, and it's been great. I try to use it as an educational space as well. We have a group that I kind of created called Florida Water Photographers, and I bring other photographers in our whole area together once a month in the evening, and I try to share um, what I know and what I learned and about printing and just technique and how we can help each other be better photographers. And so I try to also use the space as educational stuff. We have an open house every year here and so on. Yeah, it's been fun.
It's really cool. It's a lot of different things, and the fact that you're, like you said, teaching other people the technique and sort of reciprocating the skill and spreading the knowledge is really cool. Well, we've covered sort of your journey into photography and some of the stories behind some of your photographs and what it's like to create a lot of this. And I think that it makes sense to sort of wrap things up with the conservation message and what you're trying to convey with your work and how it comes through. And, like you said earlier, it's sort of a subjective interpretation, and that's some of the beauty in art. But what is it? Why should people care about sea turtles? And What is it about their conservation status that worries you the most?
Well, it's hard to measure climate change or our impact, right? Um, there's lots of different opinions around the world, politically induced or not, about how much we truly impact our planet, right? And so I think with sea turtles, there's there's no really excuses. We created this image that has a baby sea turtle on it, and below it is 800 plus pieces of plastic that was found in that turtle, and the turtle is 3 weeks old. And nobody can argue with that, right? I don't care who you are, what political organization you're with. Uh, it's kind of a problem, and the plastic is not just in turtles, but in our body as well. I was heavily involved with a film that came out last year with my second Emmy Award called "We're All Plastic People Now," and that also goes with lots of obvious evidence of our issues with plastic. That's just one thing in the conservation side with turtles. Turtles are also affected, obviously, by climate change, which is a loaded, word, a loaded phrase. Lots of people don't like hearing. Um, Having, the nests being too warm, and it drastically changes things. And, if a biologist has done these studies all over the world saying there is, 99% females now coming out of sea turtle nests, that's an obvious problem that they didn't have 100 years ago, right?
Right.
Now, people argue, oh, there's been ebbs and flow of the climate and our, heating of the planet, but turtles have been around since dinosaurs, right? There's proof of that. I think everybody agrees with that. And so, if that was the case, if they had problems like that with nesting, all females, how would they survive back in the day? So I think it's there's a million pieces of evidence uh, by working with sea turtles and showing how we impact them and so on. Lighting techniques along the beaches, our plastic usage, you name it. It's easy for me, to be honest. That's one of the things that attracts me to sea turtles, right? So I can say, hey, if I'm going to do anything when I leave this planet, it's that maybe I educated a group of young people that are the next generation that will say, maybe we're not going to buy 30 water bottles from Costco this week, every week, um, that are just going to be thrown away or not even drank the whole thing. That drives me crazy when there's a water source, perfectly normal. And this is only in obviously first world countries. It's different when you go to third world countries when they don't have a viable water source. Then yeah, you got to use water bottles. But if you go there, they don't waste like we do. You know, you don't have to educate lots of developing countries about this problem. You do have to educate about their waste near where they are, but that's a health issue. They're not the ones that are causing the problem. It's first world countries that are the problem. That we just constantly just do so many things that are not needed. Events, all kinds of events that just use so much disposable plastic. I've seen pallets of water get thrown away, never touched, because they sat in the sun or
Different
something. They
level.
weren't able to be used. Uh, that never needed to happen. You go to Europe and it's not nearly a problem as it is in the United States. People have a water bottle. They don't buy plastic water bottles like they do in the United States. I'm not sure how that happened, but maybe the big box stores started the trend that we need to buy water. Coca-Cola is probably the biggest problem in the world, right? A lot of people don't realize that, but they're one of the biggest issues with plastic is Coca-Cola. And so I always tell people that you can do little things here and there, but where you vote is is what you can do and make a difference. Is research the politician, either locally or nationally, wherever you are in the world, and if you want to change things, support the one that supports the environment.
Right. Yeah, it's all sort of makes sense, and it all does come down to that, I guess, and just kind of do it. Yeah, individual change, but then at a larger scale, like who do you want sort of to set the precedent and sort of lead? Um, yeah, and a lot of your photographs too have captured that kind of unfortunate reversible through work, but that reality of, I mean, the plastic pollution, and you've got some photos of sea turtles that, I mean, there's one where it's gaping and you see the plastic bag floating in the water, and it's just like, I mean, seeing that firsthand like you do must be really frustrating. You see the impacts of that kind of thing, and it's
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things is when they rehab juvenile sea turtles that had plastic in them, and they get them back to health, right? And then we bring them out into the ocean where the Gulf Stream is, which is a current that has all the seaweed, and that's where they live. And we put them back, and I'm out there photographing them, and there's plastic all over the seaweed, and they're going to go right back in there and eat the plastic again. You know, so yeah, it's frustrating for sure. But I'll keep going and keep educating, keep talking to people like you that care about it, and we'll keep making a difference.
Yeah, well, it's a positive note. And there was something I was listening to some of that you did a little interview. You said something in there at the end of it that stood out to me that I think is a good message, but it was something along the lines of the innocence of nature commands the power of humanity, which I think is a really powerful statement, and it captures a lot of it. It's like the sea turtles, they're going out and trying to eat these jellyfish that just turn out to be plastic bags. There's nothing that animal can do to know that, but we have the power to kind of change that directionality. So it's a really it's on our shoulders as individuals, but also as a collective, to make the difference. And that's something that I think that you've sort of brought up. So I guess to finish this off and sort of conclude everything, for someone looking to make, it could just be turtle work or the sort of thing that you do, with sort of the art side of things, what is one piece or a few pieces of advice that you would give to someone doing that?
Um, well, for one, I followed my passion, right? And I think passion projects uh, a lot of times lead to success. And just like you know, you you ended up here because you had a passion, and people that have a passion have a drive much more than they have with something that they don't have passion in, right? And so, looking at a career, I think you always have to weigh out the practical side of things, but at the same time, follow your passion, and you gotta work harder than everyone else, and that's maybe trying to do the same passion, and so I think for me also, I recognized back when I started that there wasn't anybody doing what I was doing, especially on the conservation side with turtles and so on. And so I found the niche of what I like to do, but also on a business side and a uh, practical side that I could make a living doing it. Every day I have to innovate. I got to be ahead of everyone else, the next step. And so I'm constantly trying to innovate and trying to figure out how I can work less, for one, and do
Yeah.
the same amount of work, but also, make a difference. And there's so many different avenues, and that was one of my passions, right? Is to try to make a difference in the environment and with nature. And so I think following your passion and then driving it harder than you could ever imagine is something that it takes. I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for many years before I was able to really say that I can make a solid living doing what I do. So it didn't just come over. And so, but it's something, and it could be applied to any type of career, right? But if you talk to anybody that's successful in a unique career like mine, you'll hear them say that they busted their butt for many years, and so expect that it's not going to come overnight. Yeah,
Right. I like that. It's real. It's not sugar coated. It takes work, and you can't be afraid of putting it in. But at the same rate, find some solace in the fact that it's what you love to do, and that's a blessing on its own, kind of. Well, I think that's a good place to sort of finish off. At the end, we like to do a little turtle trivia. I don't know if you've got a few minutes, but
go for
or
it.
yeah, I mean, if you want to throw a question my way, we could do that, or I can toss one your way, however you want to do it.
All right, let's see. So the last year that they have um, everything compiled, how many sea turtle nests were in Florida, 2022?
Oh man, okay. Well, I could, yeah.
Approximately. You can give me an approximate number.
Okay, the I think about 200,000 is what I've heard, but that could be off.
It's about 120 for 2022.
120.
But
Okay.
that's a good guess because a lot of people have no clue. They'll say 10,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a huge number, right? And but that's a good omen of what happens with that many nests, and they still have a problem with turtles surviving.
Yeah, right. That does put it in perspective.
All right, you tell me one.
All right. Well, okay, so I'm sea turtle wise. I feel like I should stick in that avenue. Um okay, here's one that's kind of this may be kind of obscure. But for the Arabata phenomenon, I've been researching this a good deal. We've got a conversation coming up with Pamela Plotkin, who's done a lot of research with that phenomenon. Um, there's a lot of different hypotheses behind what drives that or how they congregate. And one of those is that they can pick up on scent. And so, from sort of pheromone release almost, what is the name of the pore that the pheromones potentially come out of?
Oh man, I don't have the slightest clue.
Okay,
The
yeah,
pore and is in a what?
it's a
Jeez.
gland, I guess. Yeah, in opening a fossa.
That's definitely over my pay grade.
It's called the Rathke's gland, and it's pretty interesting. I don't know um, how well founded the theory is behind that, but yeah, I just in a nutshell, I guess it's fascinating that Arabata behavior is like no one really
How did they
understands.
figure that? How did they even come to that hypothesis? Right? Like that's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's really interesting. I think that it's like the amount of work that's been done on those mass nesting turtles and the fact that there is no concrete understanding of how that actually happens or why. It's just a fascinating thing. But yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, so that kind of works. But all right, cool.
It's a
Well, that
wild
was
one.
yeah. I mean, if there's anything else that you want to finish off with,
Well, I have an updated quote that I came up with earlier this year, but the
okay.
quote you said is very popular. That I just put that on an Instagram post, and I came up with it, I don't know, years ago, and it's definitely been around the world.
Yeah.
So my latest one is the simplicity of nature hides the complexity of danger. So
Yeah.
it's very much on the same level, but I think a lot of people, it comes back to a lot of people's exposure to seeing nature, and they're exposed in such a tiny way, don't realize at that moment what's going on with that, and especially sea turtles, right? For instance, you see a baby sea turtle out in the water, you don't realize that it's already full of plastic, or it's just about to get eaten. Um, you know, it's
Right.
constantly in danger, and everything is really right. The bird flying above trying to look for them, or anything like that. You know, they're in danger. Most of the time, we are not. We put ourselves in danger, right? But the human species is, we have a lifespan, and we're lucky that most of us get to live most of that. But a lot of animals, they're cut short for how many that are being born, and that's more or less related to our sea turtles. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I have to leave.
Awesome. Yeah, I that juxtaposition is the simple and the complex. A lot to think about, and yeah, it's been awesome to have your perspective as someone who sort of looks at this in a kind of a different way than I think a lot of times the analytical, the researchers, the ones who are going out with the goal of getting data to put into something. It's interesting, but you miss a lot of you have to search a little bit harder, use a little more calories to figure out sort of the beauty of it. And so you capture that really well, and it's been an honor to talk with
Thank
you
you.
today. Thanks for coming on, Ben.
I
We'll
appreciate you
see you on
having
the
me.
next one. Thanks.